to do as well, but making sure that the brave women and men that serve our city as firefighters is a statement of the values of our community. And I know
Mayor Dickens says that 4 new fire stations are under construction right now. He also mentioned orders for 7 new fire engines and 7 new ladder trucks for the city.
The Federal Reserve intensified its fight against the worst inflation.
A local store owner to approach him. He says hours later that business owner came back. Diamond says this is video of the moment things got physical.
He called me a derogatory term I hadn't heard since I was 15 years old.
Since then, festival goers have posted their frustrations to social media, calling the altercation a hate crime. Those in Little Five Points a day later say they're surprised it hasn't blown over.
It's kind of a community, so everybody's kind of aware of, any incident that happens, and most people try to stop it before it starts. Every blue moon you get something that goes a little too far, but most times it's a pretty safe place.
Atlanta police say off-duty officers working the event responded to the fight. They report the man arrested slapped his cell phone out of Diamond's hand, striking his glasses and resulting in marks on his face. That man faces disorderly conduct and damage to property charges, but Diamond and event organizers say the camera didn't capture the other men who hurt him and one of his employees.
I grew up in an area where I was called that so many times that I just couldn't take it anymore. So I left to come here and feel like I belonged somewhere. That's why I loved it here. And to hear that from someone that owns a shop in the community was nothing but a shock to me.
Alex Whitler, Fox 5 News.
Early voting, no waiting. The 2020 election, they had a food truck parked right here. And right there is the front of the library where you go in. The back side of the library is, you go down that sidewalk right there where it's pointing. And that's how you, normal person gets in. But I have to use the front door to get back there. But I don't have to wait. Gonna be a new tattoo parlor. Individual tatting booths. Good spot for it. Out of the way.
On Ben Hill Road back in February. East Point police spent months trying to identify the victim. Her parents came forward last month. Police haven't released her name.
South Fulton police identified the husband and wife killed in a deadly crash. Police say 2 cars collided Tuesday as Leon and Christine Watson tried to turn left from Bethsaida Road onto Jonesboro Road. Medics took the driver of the other car to the hospital. Investigators are working to determine what led to the deadly crash.
Johns Creek police say that a 17
A couple of weeks ago, I told you about street racers who shut down this intersection on Easter Sunday. Investigators have been working diligently to identify those involved. So far, 12 people have been charged, and police are still looking for others.
Reckless driving stunts or shut down the intersection.
Traffic came to a standstill Easter Sunday as a crowd gathered to watch and video cars doing donuts, burnouts, and other stunts in the middle of the intersection of Howes and Rucker Roads in Roswell. When the first officer pulled up, her car was surrounded. Several people kicked her patrol car, denting it.
Allowing the cars to exit the scene as quickly as they could.
Since then, investigators have been pulling dash and body cam video and asking the public for pictures, video, and information determined to identify those involved. 12 people have now been charged. 4 of them were drivers, but police say the others played a big role too and are charged with non-driver participant under the city's year-old enhanced reckless driving ordinance.
So those were people who were spectators, who were assisting just by being in a physical presence and shutting down the intersection. people who were in the pit while these things were taking place, videoing it and putting that information online.
Investigators say many in this same group also brought traffic to a stop the same day in other parts of North Georgia, including here in Cherokee County. Police say they're cracking down because it's not just disruptive, it's dangerous.
It's a very high likelihood with the type of behavior that they're engaging in and the crowds that are surrounding them that somebody's going to get hurt. It's not just doing donuts.
Police still want anyone who has video or photos of the chaos at this intersection to contact them. It may help them identify others. In Roswell, Denise Dillon, Fox 5 News.
Holland's been giving me a fit today. It don't like me, I don't like it. Guess that's a stalemate, or what is that? Mutual dislike? There's that gray cloud over my head.
Those shots where the players are coming toward you underneath the basket, and Jack Harlow has a little fun and starts turning the dials. He did return the dial to its original setting, but you can tell that the camera person noticed that something was happening with the camera. Now, the clip went viral and even got the attention of the photographer. Her name is Tammy Wynn. She actually tweeted that Jack Harlow actually owed her some chicken fingers for this stunt, and he tweeted her back saying, "I got you, Tammy." Having fun there.
Oh my
Yeah, he said she notices that there's something going on with kind of like the hue and the color of the camera, but she didn't.
Game begins.
There's no way for you to say, hey, this race is missing from my ballot, because you don't know it's missing. So this is a huge problem.
Fulton County Commissioner Marvin Arrington is frustrated his name was not initially on the ballot at the Wolf Creek Library early voting precinct when he voted Monday. He says the problem was eventually resolved, but worries there's a glitch in the system following a redistricting plan that created split precincts.
There had already been 100 people that have voted at the Wolf Creek Library prior to me voting. My concern, my worry, is that there are other people at all of the other early voting precincts that may not have known.
Commissioner Liz Halsman says in these first few days of early voting, this is not an isolated issue.
Obviously, it's serious. I got a few candidates that reached out also. So you may have checked District 5, but I can tell you it's happening in District 1. I can tell you it's happening in House districts in North Fulton.
Fulton County election officials blame the problem on the ENET election data system employed by the Secretary of State's office.
It's not currently populating whatever changes we made with redistricting. We have already communicated with the SOS in regards to that.
But a spokesperson for the Secretary of State's office pushed back on those claims, saying Fulton's attempt to pass the buck is just a continued disservice to their voters. Their attempt to blame state systems is disproven by the fact that other counties with less people and less resources aren't having these issues while using the same systems. Instead of fixing issues, Fulton points fingers and their voters suffer.
Pray that
extended struggle during which the officer's weapon went off. The suspect was taken to a local hospital where he was later declared dead. The officer involved in this tussle was not injured. We will continue to keep you updated on air and online as new developments come into the newsroom. You can see everything we know inside this story on 11alive.com. Law enforcement across Metro Atlanta have been trying to fight recent street takeovers by drag racers and their spectators. And now Roswell police tell us they arrested 12 people who took over an intersection on Easter Sunday. This was the video taken that day on the corner of Rucker and Howes Roads. You can see the cars blocking the intersection and people watching drivers laying drag. The police report listed most of the 12 people as spectators, but it does say 3 people were arrested for reckless driving. Check this out. Police say a car was caught on camera going 101 miles an hour through a school zone. Unbelievable. This was right outside of Duluth Middle School on Pleasant Hill Road. Duluth police released the video this morning. They are warning drivers that speeding through a school zone comes with a price. The first ticket is $70.
Changed. For example, I think that a pregnant woman does not count as a carpool for driving in the carpool lane.
Right now, gubernatorial candidate on the Democratic side, Stacey Abrams, says she is pausing her campaign fundraising. Instead, she is shifting her focus to collect donations to help abortion rights groups across the state of Georgia. Abrams highlighted 5 organizations the donations will support, among them Feminist Women's Health Center, Sister Song, and Planned Parenthood Southeast. In an emailed statement, Abrams says, "We know that no one individual campaign or organization can guarantee reproductive choice on their own. We can only fight and win this fight by uniting and doing the work together." Right now, she is the only.
Vincent Velasquez is a retired homicide detective who also worked robbery. He says it's very unusual for a rifle to be used in a carjacking.
This police officer did exactly what he should have done. He cooperated. He didn't try to engage this suspect. Even if he did, we may be talking at this point about an officer killed.
The thief abandoned the car a couple blocks away. Velasquez says it's likely the thief saw items in the car that made it clear this was an Atlanta officer's car.
Snellville police charged a father with murder after they say he left.
With the Federal Reserve announcing interest rates will rise by a 0.5 percentage point. The move, which makes borrowing more expensive, aims to bring down historic inflation. The Fed is rolling back the stimulus it pumped into the economy during the pandemic. Today's move is meant to slow down spending and combat soaring prices.
We're strongly committed to restoring price stability. Against the backdrop of the rapidly evolving economic environment, our policy has been adapting, and it will continue to do so.
The Federal Reserve is also looking to reduce its balance sheet, another policy tightening move as it tries to fight inflation.
Now to the war in Ukraine, accused Russia of using missile terrorism tactics to spread fear. Air raid sirens sounded in cities across the country Wednesday night. Heavy fighting continued at a steel mill in Mariupol. It's the last stronghold of Ukrainian resistance in the ruined port city.
We have the key weapons without which we could not deoccupy the cities like Mariupol. We have a big issue. Russia blocked all the trade routes, and we cannot export our wheat.
The European Union has now moved to further punish Moscow for the war by proposing a ban on oil imports.
Donald Trump Jr. met with the Congressional Committee investigating the Capitol insurrection. The Associated Press is reporting the interview with the former president's oldest son happened today. He's one of nearly 1,000 witnesses interviewed by the House committee. They're working to compile a record of the worst attack on the Capitol in more than 2 centuries. Don Jr.'s sister, Ivanka Trump, sat down with lawmakers for 8 hours in early April. Transgender boys and girls
says this was the first trial and conviction for its newly created Firearm Violence Prevention Unit. Today, Boston credited the unit with the first of what she hopes will be many convictions for senseless crimes involving guns. A 2018 homicide case in DeKalb County is now closed as the convicted killer, 20-year-old Jaquez Emmanuel Cooper, will serve life in prison for the murder of 18-year-old Renee Bentecourt Jr.
It was one of those cases that we identified that we wanted to make a hard push so that the community would know that we were fighting to keep them safe.
The dispute that led to the shooting was over a stolen cell phone. DeKalb County District Attorney Sherry Boston tells Fox 5 that with easier access to firearms in Georgia and an increase in gun violence across the metro Atlanta area since the pandemic began, cases like this are becoming more common.
Now, disputes are not solved by words or even fists. People are pulling out guns.
According to data from the DA's office, DeKalb County saw an increase in the number of homicide cases from 2020 to 2021, and 90% of those cases involved a firearm.
Gun violence that was happening in our gangs and homicides, we were seeing an uptick, continued gun violence in the area of domestic violence, and of course, we had armed robberies.
That's where Boston says the county's new Firearm Violence Prevention Unit comes in, working with federal and local law enforcement to monitor gang activity, investigate and prosecute firearms cases, both legally and illegally obtained.
We have an ADA.
Last week that Governor Brian Kemp signed a bill into law pushing them to make a determination. Surrounded by supporters April 28th, Governor Brian Kemp signed a bill into law that he said would ensure fairness in girls' sports. The legislation assigned the Georgia High School Association with determining whether it was necessary and appropriate to prohibit males from participating in female sports. And less than a week later, the GHSA's State Executive Committee met in Thomaston to approve the change.
It was a unanimous decision to allow the sex determination on the birth certificate for competition.
Previously, the GHSA's bylaws left it up to the member schools to determine.
Just days into early voting, and one Fulton County commissioner up for re-election is pointing out a major glitch in the system. What he says was missing from his ballot.
As the war rages on, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is making his plea for President Biden to visit the war-torn country. Why he says now is the best time for President Biden to come tour the devastation.
The city of Atlanta fires 2 top city officials in the wake of the Mitzi Vickers bribery trial. Coming up, I'll tell you who and how their names.
Away from City Hall. Snelldale Detective Jeff Manley says that Davian Watley parked his car near City Hall and walked into the police department to pick up a confiscated gun at around 2 o'clock on Tuesday. Police say a background check showed a warrant for probation violation. They took him into custody, and police say he never said anything about his 8-month-old daughter, Nova Grace.
He was on video the entire time from the moment he walked into the Snellville Police Department to the moment he was transported and released to deputies for processing in the Gwinnett County Detention Center. He made no statements as to the fact that his daughter was left in the car.
The baby was in the car for 7 to 8 hours before her grandmother found her.
Dominance Center at the Savannah Air National Guard Base trains both reservists and active duty flight pilots. The fighter pilots. The president's 2023 budget request would eliminate that funding. Senator Raphael Warnock sent the letter with a signature from Senator John Ossoff, putting the Democratic lawmakers at odds with the president.
A stock market rally as the Federal Reserve announces new interest rate hikes. I'm Mallory Rivera in Washington with what this means for the economy coming up.
And Chief Meteorologist Stephen Chandler here. Isolate at home and maintain a virtual work schedule. He is expected to resume his full duties and travels as soon as possible. Health officials say the COVID count is increasing, averaging about 69,000 cases every day in the U.S. That's about double what it was last month, but hospitalizations and death tolls are still very low. Medical experts say a surge can be avoided if everyone keeps up with their booster shots.
Deaths have increased in recent years. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, there have been 906 reported deaths since 1998. 53% of hot car deaths happen because someone forgets a child in a car. Turns out Thursdays and Fridays have had the highest deaths. Experts say the temperature in a car can rise about 20 degrees in just 10 minutes, even with the window cracked. Officials say parents and caregivers should always look inside the car before locking the doors, and obviously never leave a child alone.
Well,
the president says his administration is on track to cut the national deficit by $1.5 trillion this year, potentially reducing inflation.
Chair Powell also noted the strength of the economy. He also noted that there's a path for a soft landing.
Others are doubtful.
And with this inflation coming in the Fed policy, I don't see how you stop from being a crash landing, and I just don't see it.
The Fed also intends to reduce its balance sheet, which will further raise the cost of loans. In Washington, Mallory Rivera, Fox News.
Fox 5. What they should do, and that means mask mandates.
A-Ruse would have made us like California and New York. Made us like California and New York. Strict mandates and lockdowns. Businesses closed. People laid off.
And today, a Russian missile strike in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk Oblast destroyed a grain store. Ukrainian authorities say a, quote, enemy missile was responsible for the attack, but thankfully no one was hurt. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning of a food crisis for the country, as this is now the third grain store bombed in just days. And tonight, for the first time, we're hearing from Ukrainians who have been evacuated from Mariupol.
Russia's attack on the southern port city has been relentless since the war started almost 10 weeks ago. But this weekend, a brief moment of hope as a ceasefire allowed the first evacuation of civilians taking cover in a steel mill. Fox's Griff Jenkins has the latest from Kyiv.
Slowly emerging from the rubble of the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, where they have been trapped for weeks, dozens of civilians, mostly women and children, saw sunlight for the first time in days, evacuating on buses organized by the United Nations and Red Cross. Other civilians, stranded in the war-torn city, got out in battered vehicles, with tearful reunions as they arrived safely in Zaporizhia, 140 miles away.
It was a risk. It was a risk, but they wanted to get from Mariupol.
Hundreds of civilians and soldiers remain inside the plant, the last remaining stronghold of Ukrainian forces in the city. Those who got out recalled their horrific experience.
Constant shelling during the day, at night. The house were damaged. We hid in the basement.
Now, amid reports of renewed attacks on the city, the Pentagon is hopeful evacuations can continue.
We obviously urged.
Comes as a senior U.S. defense official says Russians have had minimal progress in the eastern Donbass region. Meanwhile, the State Department is sending diplomats back into Ukraine, announcing plans to reopen the Kyiv embassy by the end of the month. The acting ambassador sending a strong message to Moscow.
I would say the message to Russia is you failed. Ukraine is still standing.
And missile strikes continued across the country today, including in the southern strategic port city of Odessa, killing a 13-year-old child and seriously injuring a 17-year-old girl, according to the member of parliament from that area. In Kyiv